Unit 70 held more than just a few old dusty things. It held more than a simple school custodian. Truly, I underestimated how many things could fit into such a small little room. Memories, regrets, a whole heap of loneliness. I messed up, and I know that now, because I got to Unit 70 too late. When it was opened, I felt so useless. My name is Josiah Hollowbuck, but everyone calls me Journey, and I'm a lowlife. I've never dedicated my life to anything important or singular. This is my confession and a resolution to be better, to become an active member of society. I realized I need to do this not because I'm at risk of suicide, not because I'm dealing with depression. This change is because I've had no agency. Or rather, I've ignored my agency. I need to pick a direction and run, so I've left Haver without telling anyone. If I don't run, then I'm at risk of doing nothing the rest of my life. If that happens, I might as well be a non-person. So, I let John Reefman die. I work at the Storage Fleming Unit Center, or I did, as a security guard / custodian. A custodian, for those that don't know the actual definition, is a person who has responsibility for or looks after something, be that a person or place or whatever else. The responsibilities in this case weren't that great. I spent most nights past operational hours just sleeping. The owner never showed up, and Haver isn't a place known for crime. Thieves are better off robbing something other than the storage units. So I got paid an almost livable wage to do nothing, so that plus the odd under-the-table job paid the bills quite well. I could do whatever while watching the cameras, but again, mostly I slept. The only bother would be the phone, usually one or so calls a night. I never answered, of course. I just let the caller assume that they couldn't reach us at night, and that worked fine. If it was the owner, he'd call my cell. The only other thing that would wake me was John using the restroom. John paid me $100 a month for him to live in his storage unit, number 70. Okay. I looked the other way, and he never caused any problems for me. He'd show up at closing time, and I'd let him out at daybreak for his job as an elementary school custodian. John was a senior in high school when I was a freshman. I think he failed a year or two. He was liked by his classmates, never part of the outgroup really. While I never made much of an issue of asking about it, something between high school and now went wrong for him. He'd occasionally try to start up a conversation that'd go nowhere. The midshift manager would always leave his copy of the New York Times around, and I'd pass it to Reefman. Sometimes he'd stick around and try to talk to me about whatever it was he was reading. He didn't have a phone or a TV, so that copy of the Times was a big thing to him. Took him the longest time to learn that I don't watch baseball, and I never have. Something must have went wrong for him to not realize most people don't. I'm not sure why he would assume I would. Reefman was needy, but I was selfish. That's just part of my mindset. I avoided talking to him as much as I could. He was a bony, lanky man. His shoulders were very broad and hunched forward in a manner that looked unnatural, or at least uncomfortable. His graying hair was always pulled back and parted in the middle like a stream hitting a large expropriated rock. His jaw was square, not in a manner similar to a G.I. Joe doll, but a Ken doll, slightly melted from the sun exposure of being placed in the back seat of a mid-sized sedan. Very turtle-like lips, pursed to give a feeling of stoicism, until he spoke, of course. Normally, I would just sleep to ignore him. I'd sleep no matter what. But acting busy or just acting like I was sleeping would work too. But the night that he did it, I was high as a kite on Special K and Vicodin. So, I was passed out, but awoke by police lights shining in my face like a supernova rupturing my retinas. The volume of the sirens paired with the blindness I was suffering made me fall out of my uncomfortable office chair and smack my head right on the ground. I balled up in a fetal position, with the assumption I was ODing or at the very least having the worst trip of my life. I squinted my eyes tightly shut and used my hands as earmuffs. A minute or two passed until one of my hands was ripped away from my ear by the wrist. It was Daniel, a friend of the family. He was a deputy and the last person I wanted to see while disoriented and high. I remember feeling his judgment as words, as frantic, hurried words. "You're fucking high, aren't you, Journey?" I remember thinking he had no right to judge me for coasting through life. I remember thinking he was out of line to invade the storage units because I was visibly sleeping in the office window. Then I realized the sirens had stopped and the gate was opening. Daniel had buzzed it open, and his police cruiser was pulling through the rows of units. "Which one has the guy in it?" Unwilling to give Jake an inch, I played dumb, but I don't remember my exact phrasing. "He's killing himself. There's no time for games." I was shocked to hear that when it finally registered, however long that took. Felt like minutes due to the drugs. I blurted out Unit 70 when I realized the situation. Daniel had me sit down and handcuffed me to the armrest of my chair. I don't think he did it so much as a deputy. I think he did it more as a teacher giving a bad student a timeout to think. No thinking could really occur though. Too much ketamine clogging my mind and preventing me from focus on what was happening. I knew a suicide was happening, but I didn't have the presence of mind to comprehend anything else. A woman officer came in to uncuff me later and escorted me to Reefman's unit. Inside the unit was a Coleman's lamp on the far side, its light obscured by a box beside it so that it didn't reach the opposite wall. On that wall, sitting in a metal folding chair, was Reefman. It was dark, but if you've ever seen a dead body, it's hard to miss. I felt responsible, but I didn't know how responsible I was at the time. Daniel stood just outside the unit, leaning his ass on the hood of his patrol car. He had a flashlight in his left fist, resting it on his lap. His right hand was against his forehead, and from my angle, his black watch looked like a sensor bar preventing me from reading his eyes. It was a deer in headlights moment. It was just surreal. I knew somehow this was my fault. The feeling of judgment became justified now. But trying to get me to understand the situation in such a state would be like explaining tort reform to a 4-year-old that also happened to be a dog. Daniel pointed to the office. "Go sleep it off," he said. At some point in the office, the other cop, Officer Gilroy, took my statement. I don't remember that, but I'm not sure if it's the drugs or the grief or the both that caused my amnesia. I do know that I fell asleep in the chair. I do also remember that I spent some time pacing back and forth in the office, approaching the door then backing off. It was as if I was told to go to my room. I wanted to explain my side of the story to Daniel. Allow me to enumerate the problems with that. 1, I was too high to explain anything. 2, I was both asleep and high during Reefman's suicide. 3, I was guilty of something and not just getting high. 4, I didn't know what I was guilty of though. 5, I was suffering from what Mr. Rogers would call big emotions, grief, confusion, anger, just generalized big emotions that I couldn't turn off. Little did I know that the big emotions would grow louder in the morning when the drugs wore off. The difference between being outside a concert hall and being smack dab in the front row of the pit next to a speaker set. The clouds shifted out of the way of the sun and it blinded me awake. That instance was disorienting and allowed me the momentary delusion that last night was a dream from the police headlights until now. But then there was Daniel and his police glasses resting his ass against the cruiser, waiting for me to wake up. The back driver's side door was open. Old Deputy Dan had his arms folded disapprovingly. He used his thumb and his index finger to smooth over his policeman's stash and returned his arms to their resting position, nodding back at the same time towards the open door. I grabbed my sunglasses and windbreaker and left the office. I asked Daniel if he was waiting for me there all night as I walked to the open door. He didn't move. Not a bit. Not even the rise and fall of his chest. It wasn't until an appreciable amount of time had passed from me shutting the door of the cruiser that he slowly turned around and entered the car. At the time, I was under the impression I was going to jail or to the police station or something. Daniel was pissed and not open to talking, so I didn't test him by asking him a question. Normally I'd try and lighten the mood, but even I knew this was dire. To my surprise, Daniel drove to McDonald's and started ordering from the drive-thru. He asked me if I wanted anything. I just said, black coffee. There went my mind thinking about tort reform again for some reason. Pulling out of the Mickey D's, I was again unsure of the situation. I might have just passed up my last opportunity for real fast food if I was going to jail or eventually prison. I just didn't know what the deal was, so a few sips into my coffee, I asked where we were heading. Home, he said. Home. Home? I didn't take it literally for some reason. In my jumbled up mind, home was a simpler place. Home could be a state of mind. I definitely wanted to be home, but I wasn't sure how we would get there. Turns out, he just meant my apartment. At my apartment, Daniel sat down and ate silently at the kitchen table. It was a mess with spam mail and empty instant ramen packages. He then explained that the police chief and my boss both agreed to shutting down the storage units, that it would be the best thing for legal troubles and liability. All of the talk was over my head. I just have to help clean up and move out the contents of the units after the police gave it the once over. As he talked to me, I kept zoning out and remembering when Daniel would bail my friends and myself out of trouble during our adolescent years. When he'd take me fishing, one time he photoshopped a fish I caught to look bigger than it was, and he gave the picture to my dad. Dan did a lot for me when my dad wasn't around, and he never gave me bad advice, but I often ignored it. And that's when I broke down crying. Too many memories, too many things happening all at once. Dan told me to rest, but asked about where my drugs were before leaving. He grabbed a garbage bag and threw all of my liquor and drugs in there. And he took the bag with him, and he told me some good advice. I knew I should listen. Clean up your apartment, Journey. So I spent the day doing just that. When it finally came time to clean up the unit Reefman had died in, Daniel was helping me. There was a box full of children's art. A big box. Most of the pictures said, "To Mr. John" on the back. I guess the kids really liked him. I took that box along with a diary of his. I'm not sure why exactly, but I felt like I might need to investigate it further. Or perhaps it's the only memento that shows Reefman existed as a positive thing in this world. Then there was a hard drive labeled Accountability. Just a hard drive with a piece of tape on it, written in Sharpie. I was only mildly curious about why Reefman would have an internal hard drive, but Dan let me have it, assuming it was unimportant. It could only tarnish him in some way, and Daniel didn't want that. The rest of the cleanup was just as depressing and stressful as one might imagine. But all of the mundane workings of shutting down this storage unit center was overshadowed by something darker, frankly. All of this is hard enough to face and relive by itself, but what happened in the background of these events muddies things even more. I don't even know how to describe it, so I'll start with the facts and just those. Deputy Daniel came to my apartment and told me to move. Funny thing is, I was already planning on doing just that. By the time he arrived, I had already packed up all of my important things and either sold what was left to the local pawn shop or trashed it. With the money I had saved from dealing and selling my stuff, I had plenty of time to move and I could find a new job later. But, Dan's words were more urgent than that. Okay, I guess this is the important thing to mention. He asked if I still had the box of drawings and the hard drive. He asked while sitting right next to me on my couch. But I at least perceived something off about the way he asked it. Like he regretted playing fast and loose with the evidence he parted ways with. Now, it was fine for me to take those things, but I felt as though I had something I shouldn't. Like there was this childlike rebellion sparked in my brain. After all of this good advice Dan was dispensing with, I felt like this was coming from a different place. Like this was a different Dan than the one that I had known for so long. So I did what I needed to. I said no. He put his hand on my back and asked again. It was very surreal. I said that I pitched them. Dan was seemingly in a hurry to leave now. He left. I wasn't happy with how abrupt he left. But he hugged me deeply before that and asked where I was planning to go. I told him I didn't know because I didn't at the time. And that would have been that. He got up in kind of a not so subtle huff and left. It was already getting late, so I laid down to sleep. About 10:30 p.m., I wake up. On a whim, I pack up all my stuff in my silver 94 Mustang and start driving out of town. Now again, I can't really explain this sixth sense I was having. Just a feeling something's amiss, and it only really dawns on me at a rest stop. I just get a random feeling of dread, so I call a friend who owes me a favor, Fletch. Fletch will do anything I ask, no matter how stressful. He really owes me. So I ask Fletch to go check on my apartment, just to know if anything changed in the 2 hours I've been away. Fletch is initially confused, but complies, only to drive up on two ski mask donning figures, one holding a gas can right outside of my apartment. I shit you not. Or Fletch is fucking with me. Those are the only options, and I highly doubt he would be fucking with me. But who knows? I wouldn't expect Deputy Dan to be doing anything untoward, and now he is seemingly caught up in this mess. That's my feeling. I don't know what to think, okay? But it's serious, to say the least. Fletch says they were already in the process of leaving without starting a fire when he arrived there. And I stayed the night at a roadside motel, obviously, with no intention of going back. Now, if you can imagine, I wasn't in the mood to sleep. I couldn't look through the hard drive, but I gave Reefman's diary a gander to see if someone would have an interest in his affairs. And it starts off by talking about Reefman's life as a child. Turns out, he was from the same place I was born. Now, I didn't live there for very long, I barely remember the place, but he's from a place called Chillicothe, Ohio. So, I charted a new course, and here I am. I've heard a number of odd stories relating to the Fleming Storage Unit Center, and this is mine. In light of what happened to me, I hope you all understand why I had trouble organizing my thoughts. But I should put an end to this for now. I'll end by saying I'm going to document my experiences, past and present. Everything that's happened has had the benefit of lighting a fire under my ass about improving my life. I'm no longer drinking. I'm working on quitting smoking soon. I'm going to take up drawing or vlogging, I don't know. But I'm hoping to get a real job, not a stagnant one. Yeah. When I closed Unit 70 for the last time, I closed the previous chapter of my life, a chapter that ran on for too long. To John Reefman, I'm sorry. And I guess that's it. I'm just really sorry, and it's too late for that. Sorry, but also thank you for reminding me that life is precious. I should stop. I'm rambling.